What's up, everybody, and welcome to the Early Edge. We've got the AFC Championship, we've got the NFC Championship, and we've got an all-star crew to talk about every single bet we have. By the way, spoiler alert, it's a lot. There's some bets in the chat that people are already throwing out. I absolutely love that. Speaking of bets, speaking of picks, let's see how we did on the Friday show. This is 2 days ago. Way too many X's. You guys know, ladies and gentlemen, you know we've been on a run. This was certainly a bad day after 2 really good days. I do want to point out that while I finally lost a round matchup. Mike picked me up with a round matchup that he won. Don't forget, on the early wedge, I had 2 tournament matchups. Those both hit. So that'll be on the early wedge recap screen on Tuesday at 7 o'clock for everybody that wants to catch that show. But again, more losses than wins. I never like to see that. So we're going to get more wins than losses today at 3 o'clock and at 6:30. Let's bring in the stars of the show. Like I said, I wasn't lying. We have not a all-star crew, perhaps the all-star crew. We got Proppy. We got Mike McClure. We got R.J. White. We were just talking pre-show, and I got to say, like, we were all, like, I'm so excited for today. I mean, I think we have 4 really amazing teams. Proppy, I just want to start with you. Like, what's your feeling? It's such a general question, but I think there's just so much excitement. We see it in the chat. Japan saying, let's go. People saying, like, I can't wait for today to start, for this show to start. What's your feeling going into these games?
Yeah, I'm so fired up, Sia. I really believe that these are the 4 best teams in the NFL. I cannot wait to see these matchups personally. I love this day of football in comparison to the Super Bowl, which I just feel like there's too many theatrics and commercials and the halftime show. I just want to see some great football. So I think today, the championship day, really delivers that. And again, I really think these are the 4 best teams throughout the regular season. So yeah, can't wait to see how this unfolds.
Well, I'll tell you what, we're going to start with the AFC Championship game, but I got to ask R.J. White something first. And actually, I got to ask Mike something before we actually get into the odds and the picks. Of course, those are powered by BetMGM. R.J., you got the Bills helmet behind you. It was an extremely formidable effort. I mean, it could have gone either way, perhaps, but probably the Bills were outplayed. What's the feeling going into this game now that the Bills are out of the playoffs?
The Bills were definitely outplayed. I mean, Chiefs should have won that game by a lot more. So the feeling is, let's hope, just personally, let's hope somebody stops these Chiefs, because I'm getting kind of tired of seeing them in the Super Bowl. I'd like to see some other teams get a chance here, Mike. I know you don't want to hear that, but the general populace, I think, is getting a little tired of watching the Chiefs win and win and win, and just Patrick Mahomes being the new Terminator and just unstoppable.
That's a really interesting point. Again, we'll get to the game in a second, Mike. I got to land here with you, though, because you are the Kansas City Chiefs fan. I think RJ's probably right. People are kind of sick of watching the Kansas City Chiefs win. It's not because they're the Kansas City Chiefs. I mean, any team that wins a lot, you're just going to get that feeling. Do you feel like it's an us against the world thing as you march into this game today?
Yeah, definitely. It's the biggest underdog Patrick Mahomes has ever been in his career now in this particular game. But yeah, it's definitely a lot of fatigue out there after all the success that they've had. So it makes a ton of sense. I was actually happy to hear RJ talk about last week's game, though. While it was close on the scoreboard at the end, if you look at some expected metrics and the way that game played out, Kansas City was the better team by about 10 points in that Buffalo game. Pretty telling there. So it's very interesting to see some of the line movement that we've seen. Obviously, I know it's mostly related to Kansas City's injury report, but yeah, I'm glad to hear RJ back it up that the Chiefs-Bills game really wasn't close.
Yeah, it's true. It wasn't close. I mean, I did say it could have gone either way at the end, which it kind of could have, but like, let's make no mistake about it. The Kansas City Chiefs certainly outplayed the Buffalo Bills. And Mike, I'm going to end up kicking this right back to you. Let's take a look at the odds for this game. Again, powered by BetMGM, of course. Love this graphic, by the way. Good job, Jake the Snake. We've got the Chiefs. I mean, this is crazy, right? So we went into this week talking about, hey, Patrick Mahomes as an underdog. We talked about it last week as well. Well, this line opened at 3, I believe. It went up to 3.5. It was sitting at 3.5 for a while. It went up to 4 last night in some places. Stayed at 3.5 in other places. And now here at BetMGM and really across the board here, plus 4.5. Okay, we've got a total here of 44. I have my leans when it comes to the total. I have an official play on this game. But, Mike, I'm going to start with you because I think you're going to end up being on the other side of perhaps the rest of us. It's no surprise. And let's be honest, normally you're right. And I don't like being on the other side of you. But let's talk about your official pick on the Chiefs here.
Yes, yeah, I'm on the Chiefs side. I played it at 3.5, 4.5, and again on the money line, 1.5 units total. If you followed last week, I was a little over 3 units, 3.2 last week. So nowhere near the same size play as last week against the Bills. But 3.5, 4.5, and the money line here. When I look at Baltimore, they're definitely a great team. Can Lamar Jackson do it in the playoffs? We will see. I think he's absolutely capable of doing it. I think Kansas City's defense is legit. I have them as the third best defense in the NFL. Some metrics will have them in the top 10. Some will have them fifth, seventh. I make them the third best defense here. So the thing that I want to question on the Baltimore side, though, you know how many games Baltimore played this season against a top 10 defensive unit in terms of DVOA? They ended up playing 4 games against those top teams. Lost one of them to Cleveland, lost one of them outright to the Pittsburgh Steelers, had the great game against the Niners with all the Brock Purdy interceptions. I think we see a different game plan from Kansas City. So when we look at what Spagnuolo did last week against the Bills, they wanted the Bills to run the football. They wanted to keep everything in front of them at all costs. If they're able to work their way down the field and have efficiency in the red zone, congratulations, you beat us. I think it's going to be the exact opposite against Lamar Jackson. I think they're going to send a lot of pressure. I think they're going to give him looks in single coverage. I think they're going to try to make Lamar Jackson beat them with his arm. So I think it's going to be a totally different defensive philosophy from Kansas City this time out. And I don't think the Ravens are good enough defensively against the run and with what Patrick Mahomes is able to do. They're able to take 6-7 minutes off the clock at a time. I just think the friendly numbers here, 3.5, 4.5, I think that ultimately is very likely to be another one possession game.
Yeah, that's completely fair. By the way, Bradley Jacobs says, because he knows what I'm about to pick, probably because he's a member of SportsLine, but also because I kind of tipped my hand a little bit here. He says, I always tail Sia blindly, but I'm terrified today. Hashtag in Sia we trust. So that's a good segue to getting to my pick here. I'll make it pretty simple here. And I don't know if Proppy or RJ are going to have comments with regard to the spread. I see when I look at their picks, I see kind of where they might be leaning on a side, but I'm going to take the Ravens minus 3.5. So what Mikey said about facing top 10 defenses, there's some legitimacy there. But when I look at the body of work for the Kansas City Chiefs, and I look at who they faced the last 2 weeks, I mean, let's be honest about the defenses they faced. The Bills, they didn't have anybody. Like, they had so many guys injured. The Miami Dolphins, they didn't have anybody. They had so many injured. Now you got to go to Baltimore and face a real defense. And when we look back at this Kansas City team, listen, playoff Mahomes, like, that's a real thing. But this offense has not exactly clicked, and they're really starting to miss Tyreek Hill. Now, Rashee Rice, he's certainly stepped up. Travis Kelce, I'm sure will have a decent game. But at the end of the day, I think this Baltimore Ravens defense is too formidable. And by the way, the Chiefs defense is good. But the Houston Texans front was good to stop the run last week too, and they got absolutely embarrassed. Lamar Jackson and company were able to do whatever they wanted to. So at the end of the day, at home, this is a team that I don't even know that we've seen the apex of this team. I don't know that we've seen the high point. I just think they're trending in such a positive direction. I'm going to go ahead and lay the points. I wish I got this at 3 like some other people did when the lines first came out, but I'll lay the 3.5. I think they win this by 4 or more. At 4.5, don't really love it. I'm not going to lie to you here because I do think it's going to be a relatively close game. All right, so that's my official pick on this game. RJ, you have a few official picks. And to me, when I look at your picks, I feel like, and I know Mike agrees with this too, because we did Fantasy Football Today DFS earlier. He thinks we're going to have a limited possessions, a lot of successful running, kind of like chewing up the clock a little bit here. And I feel like your picks really cater to that narrative. So you have the floor with your 3 official picks.
Yeah, well, the first one was earlier in the week. We took the Chiefs team total under 20.5. I just think this is a very good Ravens defense that Chiefs are going to struggle scoring on. I mean, they've just been kicking a bunch of field goals lately. We're able to break through against that banged up Bills defense later in the game. But Baltimore's defense, 3rd in yards per play, 1st in yards per pass, 2nd in red zone success rate, where the Chiefs have a mediocre this year. So with Marlon Humphrey active for the Ravens, I just think it's going to be tough for the Chiefs to score touchdowns in this game. Do you think it's going to be a lower scoring game, though? At 4.5, I could not play the Ravens. I did take him at 3.5, but just 4.5, it just feels like, Mikey's got something there. It's just too much to lay against Patrick Mahomes in the playoffs. So once you get past that 4, I'm completely out on the spread there. My other 2 picks, my picks for today, I got Justice Hill going over 33.5 rush yards. Kansas City's defense, 24th in yards per rush in the regular season. Dealing with injuries up the middle, Derek Nottie. We see Willie Gay's neck issue is going to keep him out of this game. I think there's going to be some room for him to run there with the defense keying on Lamar, trying to take away his rushing ability. And Hill outcarried Edwards last week. He got the first carry of the game as well. So I don't see any reason this line should be 12 to 15 yards below Edwards when there's a decent chance that A, it's a good matchup, and B, that he could outcarry him anyway and establish establish, a good 50, 60 rush yard game here. So love Justice Hill going over. I also take Lamar Jackson under 29.5 pass attempts. I expect Baltimore to be playing from ahead in this game, but it's going to be a pretty close game, limited possessions like you were saying, and it's going to equate a low passing volume for Jackson versus a very good Chiefs pass defense that Mikey's talking about. You don't want to attack this through the air too often and get him in trouble. So he's been under this number in 10 of 18 games, including 8 of his last 11. Just seems to set up like a game where they're going to run and not want him to throw too much in this game. So I'm going to take him under 29.5 pass attempts.
All right. I really like those because honestly, all three of those picks sort of pick into or they go toward the narrative that I sort of have in terms of how this game is going to go. Proppy, we go to you. Speaking of narratives, I think when we talk about the passing game, we're looking, and we talked about this early in the week. You got this pick off on Rashee Rice really as soon as props came out. But you have a pick here on Rashee Rice, and you have a pick here on Isaiah Pacheco. And what's interesting, it all fits pretty nicely in how, regardless of which side we are on, it fits nicely into the narrative that really Mike laid out, that RJ laid out, and that I laid out. So talk to us about Isaiah Pacheco and Rashee Rice.
Yeah, I would agree, Sia. Yeah, starting with Isaiah Pacheco. Love him today in this spot. Got him out at 60.5 on the site. The number is currently ticked up to, I believe, 63.5. Still more than comfortable playing it there. But Isaiah Pacheco has been very impressive, really coming on strong over the second half of the season as the Chiefs kind of found an offensive identity by being one of the more balanced teams in the NFL, something we've really seen elude or evade Andy Reid throughout his career. But you can't argue with the results, and Isaiah Pacheco has been a bell cow back for Kansas City. I also think looking or attacking this Baltimore defense, they're susceptible on the ground, a lot more vulnerable than they are through the air. In my opinion, they're probably far and away the best secondary or pass coverage unit in the NFL. The way you attack them is on the ground. Over the regular season, they were 18th in EPA allowed per rush, 25th in run stop win rate. So I think it's a good spot where we're going to see, barring injury, and Isaiah Pacheco being close to 100%, which I do believe he is, we'll see a lot of him. And I love him to go over 63.5 rushing yards in the process. And I like him to be the focal point of the game plan as long as we're looking at a neutral game script here or positive for the Chiefs. And then I'm going to fade Rashee Rice. We're going under 6.5 receptions against, again, this incredibly elite, stout Baltimore pass defense, rank in the top 3 in literally every single defensive passing metric, EPA allowed per dropback, PFF's coverage grade. They're also exceptional against first reads and wide receiver ones, which we know Rice has really emerged as down the stretch for the Chiefs. They have allowed 6 players all year, including the playoffs, that's over 19 games, to have 7+ receptions. That is phenomenal. You have to go all the way back to December 10th against the Rams. Cooper Kupp was the last wide receiver to have 7+ receptions against this pass defense. Oh, and by the way, they get all-pro cornerback Marlon Humphrey back as well. So, yeah, I just think this is a really tough spot for Rashee Rice, who I absolutely love, but just 7 receptions as a boundary perimeter receiver against this Baltimore pass defense, where I really feel like Kansas City, again, is going to emphasize the run here. It's just a huge ask. They're a little more vulnerable over the middle to opposing tight ends. So, yeah, I think they ultimately limit Rashee Rice under 6.5 receptions.
Yeah, I like that play quite a bit. 6.5 is a really tall order. Mike, I want to kick it to you because one thing we know about the weather in Baltimore, it doesn't look like, and I'm kind of a short sojourn away from where the stadium is, but it's rainy here. It's not like downpours or anything. We have a chance of rain during the game. It's not really particularly cold. We're talking like 45, 50 degrees. Not much wind. Does the weather impact anything here? And part of the reason I was reminded of it is there were some people in the chat talking about Justin Tucker field goals, for example. I don't know that you have to answer the Justin Tucker question, but does weather factor into this game at all for you?
Probably not. I mean, you could definitely make the case that it's harder to hold on to the football if everything gets super wet, but looking at the forecast and everything here, it doesn't even look like it's going to be raining during the game. So I don't think that there's much of an impact. The wind is definitely not impacting. I would say very minimal impact, if any.
Let me ask you this. And RJ, I have a question for you about whether or not you're pinpointing any Baltimore pass catchers whatsoever, because we know we have so many, especially with Mark Andrews healthy and Nelson Aguilar and Rashad Bateman kind of emerging in that Odell Beckham role. But I do want to ask you, Mike, about Travis Kelce. We talked about Rashee Rice. We look at his yardage prop, forget about receptions, which I love the under on the 6.5, but his Rashee Rice's yardage prop is in that 59.5, 60.5 range, but so is Travis Kelce's. It's in that 61.5 range. I'm just curious, since he's such a big ticket pass catcher for the Kansas City Chiefs, do you lean to the over there, or is it a stay away?
It would be lean to the over. I definitely wouldn't play the under, which might sound a little crazy, but the reason I wouldn't play the under is I think there are scenarios where the Chiefs do get down by 8 to 10 points here, where they actually surrender some of those easier targets for them. You get them sped up a little bit, a big drive before half, things like that I think are definitely in play. And then the only other thing I would say on Tucker, the only thing that could impact Tucker getting to attempt a 60-plus yarder in this game is the opponent. Now, do you really take a shot missing, giving Patrick Mahomes the ball, in plus territory? So that's something to keep in mind there.
By the way, Joe Neuenfeld in the chat says, Propstarz NBA props lately have been incredible. They certainly have. We chronicled that on the Friday show. He has been absolutely on fire. If you're a SportsLine member, you get access to his article. You get access to his picks early. That's how you want to do it in the NBA streets. RJ White, I got to ask you, because a couple of days ago, and I'm still leaning this direction, I talked about Odell Beckham over 19.5 yards. It's up to 20.5 now, but the problem with Odell Beckham props in my mind, as I sort of consider that prop, is, well, Nelson Aguilar is starting to get touches. Rashad Bateman is finally starting to get at least a few touches. Isaiah Likely's healthy with Mark Andrews now. I mean, there's just so many pass catchers for an offense that doesn't throw the ball a lot. So while I think a guy like Odell Beckham will get targeted early, maybe to just soften up this defense a little bit, it's hard for me to lean on any pass catchers whatsoever. What say you on any Baltimore Raven pass catchers?
Yeah, hard to rely on Beckham when he's got one target in his last 2 games, and those are 2 games that Baltimore won pretty handily. So it doesn't seem like he needs to be a key part of the game plan to win a game. So maybe he'll get a catch here or there, but it's just hard to trust him for me. I like playing Andrews props. I mean, I think he's too low on his anytime touchdown. Just because he's the old reliable there. He's the guy that Lamar Jackson knows well. I believe they had something like 37 touchdowns over the last 5 years, 70-something games for Andrews. And he had 6 touchdowns this year in 10 games. So, that's a guy he knows well. I think he's going to be a key part of the game plan, considering he practiced in full all week, seems healthy, ready to go. And they'll incorporate him in and take advantage of some of those injuries up the middle for the Chiefs. So that's who I would look at. I do like a little bit of Aguilar exposure if you want to play that on his receptions, because it seems like he's getting multiple receptions most games at this point. He's kind of the forgotten guy there. That he'll kind of sneak in there and get like a first touchdown like he did last week, out of nowhere. So I like focusing on him. I would avoid the big names, the Zay Flowers and the Odell Beckham, and look at the tight end there in Andrews, and then also Aguilar with a little bit of a sprinkle.
Yeah, Zay Flowers, his receiving prop is 43.5. So interesting numbers across the board there. By the way, so Big Cheesy says Danny B and I, that's Danny Brasco, of course. He says he's got a showdown with Danny B. He has the Lions plus 7.5. We'll get to that game. He says, wish us luck. Well, I can only wish one of you luck, right? Because only one of you can win. Speaking of Danny B, let's look at the recap screen, Jake, if we can, on this AFC matchup before we get to the gems. Bradley Jacob says, need some gems today, boys. We're getting there in just a second. Listen, this is the recap screen just for the AFC Championship. No shortage of picks here, but I did want to point out a couple of guys that were on the prop show on Friday with Proppy, but aren't on this show right now. Isaiah Pacheco, over 16.5 receiving yards. That's a play from EC. And Dave Richards got Patrick Mahomes over 36.5 pass attempts, and Travis Kelce over 62.5 receiving yards. So clearly, Dave Richard liking the Travis Kelce over prop. That was at least a small lean in Mike McClure's mind, mine as well. And of course, the Maestro's got the Ravens -3. He got that line early. Justin Watson over 14.5 rushing and receiving yards. You might be confused by the rushing and receiving. Sometimes these books offer them at the same exact number as the receiving yards. So it's really a receiving yards prop, but you never know. Maybe Justin Watson gets involved in a end around or something like that, and you cash that way as well. So Justin Watson over 14.5 rushing and receiving yards. And then finally, Danny Brasco, Chiefs Ravens under 44.5. That is a heavy lean for me as well, ladies and gentlemen. I really like that play from Danny Brasco. We talked about it earlier in the week. All right, Bradley Jacobs, you want the gems? We're going to give you the gems. And I'm going to go ahead and start here because of all the gems that I have in front of my name. But listen, I haven't gotten one in 3, 4, 5 weeks here. So maybe now is the time. I'm going Justice Hill. Listen, I know he's kind of a hot, popular name. And it feels kind of chalky to take him, but Not really, right? Because it's plus 1,700. Listen, I don't know what the goal line is going to look like early in the game in terms of Justice Hill or Gus Edwards. What I love about Justice Hill, though, is that I think he can get some goal line carries, but I also think he can get some goal line dump offs. And whether it's goal line or the green zone, I think Justice Hill can turn that into a touchdown. So I think we're getting Justice Hill at a time where his carries and his touch count are really starting to increase. And at plus 1,700, I think this is more than a fair number. So really like this play on Justice Hill as your first touchdown scorer. Proppy, you've got a player that is awesome, and he's back. Talk to us about your first touchdown scorer.
Yeah, I'm aligned here with my guy, RJ. We're going Mark Andrews. It's a gift from the first touchdown gods to have Mark Andrews qualify for the first touchdown. So I couldn't help myself and not take advantage of that, because rarely will you see him be eligible for this, because he's usually between plus 500 and plus 800 odds. So love that we're getting a shot at him here. And I do believe if he is on a snap count, where he will be utilized will be in the red zone. So RJ mentioned Lamar Jackson's familiarity with him, throwing to him in the red zone often as well, where he's heavily targeted. We saw like Sam Laporta, his first game back from injury. He didn't play a full bevy of snaps, but he was on the field anytime they were close to that red zone area or the green zone. So I think that'll be the case with Andrews as well, who, again, RJ mentioned, practiced in full on all week. So yeah, I'm expecting a big performance. I like his props as well, and love the value here for his first touchdown.
Mike McClure coming off a hit last week as a first touchdown. And I got to say, Noah Gray's so interesting, because when we were on the FFT DFS show, we talked about playing Noah Gray this week. And it's not because we think he's going to have an amazing game necessarily, although, it's in the realm of outcomes that he catches a touchdown and, has 2 or 3 receptions, but he's only 2,500 in DFS. So I know a lot of people are just putting him in the lineup because he just makes everything else fit. But you have him as a first touchdown scorer. Explain.
Yes, I love Noah Gray. I love the fact that he's increasing in terms of snap percent now. He actually played up to 60% of the offensive snaps last week. He was playing that early in the season. I know Travis Kelce missed week 1 where he saw his career high basically, but now that he's back up to 60% again, the price point at 50-1 just simply doesn't match his skill set. If you watch the FFT DFS show and you've seen it throughout the year, I think even on this show, I've talked about the skill gap between Travis Kelce and Noah Gray being very small. They are nearly identical in terms of every measurable. And that's literally why Kansas City drafted him. They drafted his replacement. I think he's incredible. And every time that he's been targeted, he's been very efficient catching the football. I think that there's enough attention being commanded with the limited targets for Patrick Mahomes now that Noah Gray could be the guy that gets loose on a busted play here early in this one. So I'll take Noah Gray 50-1.
I don't hate that at all. That number. I mean, listen, you can put $2 on that thing and cash for 100. Proppy, go ahead. You had something.
I think if Mike hits at 50-1, especially after last week, he deserves 2 gems for that price. Just throwing that out there.
I don't disagree. It's the playoffs. I think we're willing to change the rules, modify the rules just a little bit, especially since Mike's the one that got this thing started a few years back with Van Jefferson. So yeah, I think playoffs, we only got a few games left here in the NFL where he gets 2 gems for a 50-1 shot for sure. RJ, before I get to you, Mike, I have one more follow-up question for you, because it was Kevin Charles in the chat. He says, what about Clyde Edwards-Helaire rushing yards at 7.5? Interesting, knowing that, Pacheco will get a full workload, but he does have, lingering injury, and he sometimes comes out when he, throttles down to the 1 yard line. Sometimes Clyde Edwards-Helaire comes in. That seems kind of low to me. What about you?
Yeah, I could not agree more with you there. He had 31 and 21 in the last 2 games, only 2 carries in the Buffalo game. I think that he could see more than that here. I don't think Pacheco is necessarily going to leave with an injury, but this is a lot more of a physical game. He does run incredibly hard. If Pacheco does have the success that we think he will, he is likely to need spelled at least once or twice there. So I certainly would not be playing the under on CEH here, because there are definitely scenarios where he ends up having to carry the football 5, 6, 7 times.
All right. RJ White, you are aligned with Propstarz for the first touchdown scorer. Explain.
Yeah, I like all these guys that you guys are taking. I thought about Noah Gray. I knew that was such a Mikey pick that I didn't want to take it and jump on his corner, so I didn't send that in. Like Justice Hill, I talked him up earlier. But it was just Mark Andrews. I mean, he's plus 1,200. He's back. He's full practice. We talked about it earlier. It was just too easy to go with that. It's such the obvious play to go with the big touchdown guy for Lamar Jackson here when you're looking at these somewhat long shots. I know he's not a big long shot at 12-1, but it's just a price that we should not be getting. I like his anytime touchdown price at 2-1 as well. So Mark Andrews was pretty easy play for me. It's obvious, but sometimes the obvious plays hit.
I absolutely love that. And you're getting it at plus 1,200, so it can't be that obvious. Unpretentious Ox says Mahomes throws more picks than touchdowns in this game. There was some other comment that I really liked. Oh, Sean Ritchie says Lamar and Mahomes both to score touchdowns. Interesting. Is plus 900. So maybe a rushing touchdown for Patrick Mahomes as well. And CapQuest says, wasn't it Justice Hill at Oklahoma State with CeeDee Lamb and Mason Rudolph? CeeDee Lamb didn't go to Oklahoma State. You might be thinking of James Washington, though. He definitely played with Mason Rudolph. And I think Justice Hill was on that team. That was an exciting team. Mason Rudolph was pretty good on that team, by the way. So no surprise to me that he was at least average in his stint this season in the NFL. All right. There's people in the chat. They're like, let's get to the lines at 49ers. So let's do that. But by the way, if you want to take any of these bets on that game that we just talked about or the game we're about to talk about, new BetMGM customers can sign up today. This offer is still going, folks. You got to get in on it. Get $158 in bonus bets. Just place your first wager of at least $5 and you will receive $158 instantly in bonus bets, regardless of your wager's outcome, with bonus code EDGE158. That's EDGE158. All right, let's get to the second game here. It's at 6:30. Again, odds powered by BetMGM. They have this thing at 7. It's been toggling between 7 and 7.5 over the last few days. We got the 49ers again, -7 at -120. This total's going up. The weather's nice. These passing attacks probably going to be pretty good. It's a 52.5 point total. And speaking of passing attacks, RJ, I got to go to you here. I got to go to you with your picks here because it seems to me that you're pretty invested in the Niners offense and Brock Purdy specifically. So talk to us about your 3 picks.
Yeah, I just think this is a field day for the 49ers offense here. Detroit's defense has been terrible stopping the pass, could not contain Baker Mayfield and Mike Evans last week. Haven't been able to contain anyone over the last few weeks. 5 straight quarterbacks, 340 passing yards, 5 straight games with an 140-yard receiver. It just seems like you can get whatever you want against this pass defense. So I have San Francisco from earlier in the week, team total over 29.5 points. Believe you can get that still at -135 now out in the market, even though most places have 30.5. I mean, they could score 40 in this game, just the way that Detroit's defense looks and how good Brock Purdy is when he's comfortable and he's not playing in the rain and he has all his weapons, which he does this week because Deebo Samuel's going to play here. I also have 2 Brock Purdy bets. One is under a half interception at -130. So Purdy to not throw an interception. He's thrown one in just 6 of 17 games this year, including all 4 losses. So if you think San Francisco's going to win this game, it's unlikely he throws a pick because he just doesn't do that in the games that they lose. Detroit's defense had 16 interceptions in the regular season, which seems like a big number. 6 of them were against Nick Mullins. So, as long as you're better than Nick Mullins, you have a pretty good shot of having a clean sheet here in this game. They also gave up 6 games. They had 30 attempts with no picks. So it's not necessarily they see high volume, they're going to create plays. It just happens to be good matchups for them here and there. And I don't think this one qualifies. So I think Brock Purdy is one of the better quarterbacks that they've faced. He was an MVP candidate for a lot of the season. Fall off there at the end. But with his full slate of weapons here, I think he's going to have a big game. I think he's going to hit a long play against this defense. So I also like his longest completion to go over 40.5 yards. Deebo playing is big for this prop. He has 6 of Purdy's 14 receptions, 14 completions of 40+ yards this year. And Detroit has allowed a 40+ yard reception in 6 straight before last week. And so they didn't do it last week. I think it capped out at like 29 or 30 yards. But Baker Mayfield still had 349 yards on 41 attempts. So it's not like they had a great game defending him. He just picked up a lot of 25 and 30-yard chunks instead of the 140-yard chunk, which I think Purdy will be able to hit in this game because he has 3 guys that can hit big plays in Samuel, Ayuk, and Kittle there. So one of them is going to get over 40.5. Really like this prop now that we know Samuel is active.
Yeah, what's interesting is you said that Deebo, Kittle, and Ayuk can get it. Well, Christian McCaffrey can get it too on a check down or design screen where he's just running, Forrest Gump style. So absolutely love that play. I mean, I don't usually take those longest completion props, but this is the time to do it. I actually think if I'm going to call it, I think it's going to be Brandon Ayuk this time that actually beats the defense deep. So I think Brandon Ayuk is, I don't know how much volume Ayuk's going to get, but I do think he's going to get behind this defense for a completion. So love that pick. So I'll go to my pick now. This one is scary. Anytime you're taking an under, especially on a game that has a 52.5 point total, it's probably not going to be fun. You know, I've been hitting these though this season. I've been taking a lot of first half unders, specifically a lot of first half bets that we've cashed, especially in these primetime games. I'm taking Lions 49ers first half under 26. It could be up to 26.5 in some places, considering that this total has gone up about a point since earlier this morning. This is one of, and by the way, if it's 26.5, the difference between 26.5 isn't an extreme margin there. 27 would be a big difference. I don't think it's 27 anywhere. So under 26, here's what I'm really banking on here. Like, as good as Brock Purdy has been this season, and I hear everything R.J. White was saying, and I think he'll have a good game. Let's be honest about how the last 4 weeks have looked. He's looked really shaky, and he's made some bad decisions. We can explain those away to some degree, especially last week, the bad weather, all that stuff, but bad decisions nonetheless. And because this San Francisco team is so much better, well, I shouldn't say so much better, but clearly better than this Detroit Lions team from front to back, I do think they're going to lean on the running game early, and they're not going to put it much in Brock Purdy's hands. That's going to lead to a lot of long drives, a lot of Christian McCaffrey, a lot of chewing up clock. And oh, by the way, I think Detroit's going to do the same thing. I think they're going to lean on Jahmyr Gibbs. I think they're going to lean on David Montgomery. They saw what the Green Bay Packers did against the 49ers, specifically with Aaron Jones. I think they want to keep that San Francisco offense off the field. So in the first half, when the game is still close, when we're looking at largely a neutral game script, I see more of a feeling out process, almost like a Super Bowl type game where nobody's going to want to lose the game. They're going to lean on their runners, their running game. That's how I see this game going for about a quarter and a half until things kind of get out of line here. So give me the first half under 26. A pretty big fan of this bet. I'm kind of happy I found it because I haven't gone to a first half under, at least in about a month or so. But I think this is the play in this particular game. All right. Speaking of Jahmyr Gibbs, speaking of Christian McCaffrey, Proppy, you've got an over and an under. Talk to us about those two players.
For sure, Sia. Yeah, starting with the aforementioned Jahmyr Gibbs. Going to go over 70.5 combined rushing and receiving yards. Got this out on the site. This number is ticked up to 76.5. Still comfortable playing it there. I really don't think it's a big difference. We're looking at the combination line. If you wanted to, obviously feel free to scale down to a quarter or a half unit here. But I've just been so impressed with Jahmyr Gibbs really throughout the season, but especially down the stretch in the postseason. It's clear to me that he is the Lions' best offensive player, at least their best running back, with all due respect to David Montgomery, who's a fine veteran running back. Gibbs just offers so much more explosiveness, acceleration, big playability, a 3-down skill set. He's already one of the best receiving running backs in the NFL as a rookie. There's a reason they spent the 12th overall pick on him and making him the focal point or the engine of this Lions offense. I also like the matchup against San Francisco. Sia, you mentioned how Aaron Jones did last week. I really thought Green Bay's offensive line did a really nice job against San Francisco. And San Francisco's run defense has not been good all season long. This isn't just a new occurrence, and especially down the stretch as well. And the Lions run the ball as effectively as any team in the NFL. So I think it's a big advantage. And while the game script is neutral, I do anticipate them running the football quite a bit. And then the reason that we love the combination line, in addition to Jahmyr Gibbs' 3-down skill set, is if they are trailing, they will utilize him a lot as a receiver. So love attacking it from this angle. I also think Ben Johnson, very good offensive coach, obviously here, Dan Campbell as well. They're going to utilize Gibbs more than they have recently. I think he's earned more touches in this offense, which is another component to this play that I like. I'm going to speculate a little bit there. But yeah, love Jahmyr Gibbs in this matchup. And then I'm actually going to fade Christian McCaffrey's rushing attempts under 19.5. We know with this, if we're looking at the path of least resistance, we've been talking about, how vulnerable the back end of this Detroit pass defense is. They've been a very stout run defense all year long. They actually surrendered the fewest yards to opposing running backs this season in the NFL. So I just don't anticipate a heavy concentration of Christian McCaffrey, who's had some injury concerns, some durability issues. I do believe if San Francisco is playing with a lead in the second half, they're not just going to run him over and over. I think we'll see some Elijah Mitchell. They'll platoon a little bit. I just think 20 rushing attempts, if we're looking at his potential range of outcomes, just doesn't happen very often as far as distributions are concerned. So yeah, I like Christian McCaffrey to be successful in this game, be efficient. I just think 20 rushing attempts is a big ask for him. I think he'll be utilized as a receiver as well. So yeah, I'm going to go under 19.5 rushing attempts for the great Christian McCaffrey, over 70.5 rushing and receiving yards for Jahmyr Gibbs.
Joey Blaze says, Purdy party today, folks. Certainly could be. Mike, I want to go to you real quick because I don't think you have an official play on this game. But when we look at the sides here, when we look at Detroit +7, I mean, certainly this is more palatable, and it still exists at +7.5 at certain places. But, when it was 7.5, I was so close to making an official play. I backed off. I mean, there are some concerning things for the Lions. Like, they do have a key offensive line injury. Let's hope Frank Ragnow stays in the game because he was kind of banged up last week too. But I still think 7.5 is too much. Do you agree? Again, it's not an official play for me, so I don't love it. But I'm just curious where you land on the side and or the total.
Yeah, I've got nothing on the side, Sia. I made the number exactly 7. If I had to play something, it would probably be the 49ers, believe it or not, but don't feel great about it the way that they've performed of late. So if I had to play something in the game at all, it would be the total. I would go under the total of 52.5 here. I think that if you're the Lions, your path to winning this game is an ugly physical game. I think that they know they're not winning a game if it requires them to score 35 points here. At least I would think that they would understand that. So I think they're going to lean on what they should have success with, which is definitely that running game. I think they're going to try and shorten the game as much as they can. And I think they'll have some success, but they could struggle in the red zone in terms of that efficiency. On the other side, I think that San Francisco will definitely move the ball, but also keep that clock running as much as they can. So if I had to play something, it would be the under in the game, but the computer's dead on 7 on the spread here.
All right. Proppy, I want to ask you something. Stephen Mack says Purdy over 7.5 rushing yards. Now, listen, we don't really this show, I don't think has been big on targeting rushing yards to sort of non-rushing quarterbacks, but that doesn't mean the number isn't good. Do you have any opinion whatsoever on Purdy over 7.5 rushing yards?
I don't have a strong opinion on it. I'm fine with it. Obviously, if it's something you have a lot of conviction with here, I obviously would caution you with these lower numbers. San Francisco being a 7 or 7.5 point favorite, could involve a couple of kneel downs at the end of the game, and you might lose 2 to 3 yards on said kneel downs. So that'd be pretty much my only nugget of advice regarding this. But I have no problem with it if someone in the chat thinks it's a good spot.
Yeah, fair enough. And I think now is a good time. Maybe we'll have some more questions on this game. I probably skipped over some as I'm running the show here, but let's take a look at just the overall picks on this game, because again, we have a few people on the show, but we have way more picks than this. Danny Brasco, he's on that Lions +7.5. Of course, we knew that because Big Cheesy spoke to that earlier in the showdown that he has with Danny. We have Proppy's picks there, but EC, Jared Goff over 36.5 pass attempts at -130. Jared Goff over half an interception at -150. Brandon Ayuk over 80.5 receiving yards, -110. Brandon Ayuk anytime touchdown, -110. All right, we talked a lot about Brandon Ayuk today, so I don't hate that. RJ White, we have his picks right there. RJ, I want to go to you on something. One of EC's picks here. Oh, I didn't mention Dave Richards' picks. Sam Laporta over 48.5 receiving yards, but Jared Goff over 35.5 pass attempts. So I feel like if you like that pick, you think that the Lions are going to be in a pretty large trailing game script throughout the game, or for at least a large portion of the game. And I feel like on the other side, if you think the Lions are going to play it close, it's probably because their running game has been successful. So where do you fall on the Jared Goff pick? Because I do think it's correlated to how you think the game script goes in terms of precisely the 35.5 passing attempts.
Yeah, I think they'll be playing from behind. So you figure the game script would hit. I don't know that it's a number that he's been over too much. It seems like a lot of games he gets to like 32 to 35. So it does seem like a little bit high of a number. So at the price of -130, not really looking to play the over there, but definitely because I have the game script as San Francisco winning it, handily. I wouldn't play the under either because I could see that volume. It's just because he just doesn't get to that number pretty typically. It just seems like a tough number to play. I will point out that Baltimore game that they got destroyed early in the season. He had 53 attempts in that game. So if you think it's going to be a game where San Francisco runs away with it, he could get up to 50 attempts in this game.
They did absolutely get destroyed, by the way. By the way, Joe, speaking of RJ, Joe Neuenfeld earlier in the show, he said a random stray, what was it, to Nick Mullins. So if you are listening and watching this show and you are a family or a friend of Nick Mullins, you see RJ's Twitter handle. So you send that hate tweet over to RJ White. Proppy, it sounded like you had something on the Jared Goff prop.
Yeah, not to speak disparagingly about my guy EC, who I absolutely love, but I do not like this prop very much here. Both the number and the price we're getting. Things would have to go very wrong, in my opinion, for Jared Goff to attempt 36-plus passing attempts in this game, i.e. San Francisco getting out to a significant lead early in this game and forcing the Lions to pivot and essentially abandon their game plan. So I just think it's way too game script dependent of a spot, coupled with the fact it's not a good number or price. So, I would encourage people to avoid that prop.
Mikey, let me ask you this as it relates to this prop, because I know you're kind of the king of live betting. And if we see a scenario where, let's say, San Francisco gets out 14-0 and it's like sort of late first quarter, something like that. Maybe it's 10-0, 13-0. It doesn't matter. They're up double digits kind of early. And let's assume we have a handful of completions already for Jared Goff. Are we to assume at that point that the market is going to adjust the price enough, knowing that there's a trailing game script? Or at that point, is there still an edge on perhaps taking the pass attempts prop?
There probably won't be much of an edge. I think that if you want to lean over at that point, it's still okay, just because it is so early in the game still that it's difficult to cap what that upside could look like in terms of passing volume. But yeah, if they're down 2 scores in the first quarter, you will definitely see an increase in passing volume. Other things to consider there would be who gets the ball to start the second half. Always keep that in mind. As San Francisco, while they do have big playability, they are a team that can also take half a quarter with a possession. So, but yeah, if they're down two touchdowns for sure, they will throw the football a lot more. If it's 2 touchdowns first quarter, they get the ball to start the second half. They may not abandon the run quite as quickly, but I would say that in a playoff situation with only 1 game going on at the time, that I would not expect to find massive edges on the sportsbook like that.
Fair enough. All right, RJ, I know, it's interesting in this game. We know that, I think of as a Commanders fan, by the way, Papa, you mentioned Ben Johnson. I hope he's the next Commanders coach, but I think of like Riverboat Ron, or what Riverboat Ron used to be with going for it on 4th down. And I think of Dan Campbell. And so when we look at this game, I feel like a lot can happen on that side of the ball with just the coaching in general. Any insight, because I know this is something we talked about earlier, any insight about maybe a 4th down play or a Lions play as it affects 4th down? Oh, you're on mute.
Sorry, didn't want you guys to hear me trying to have a drink here or clicking clacking on the keyboard. But it's interesting. There's some places you can bet successful 4th downs for each team. The San Francisco 49ers is at -130 to convert a 4th down, and the Lions is at -250. That just tells you all you need to know about this team. They go for it plenty on 4th down. 40 of them in the regular season, converted 21 of them. And you've seen those games where sometimes they're going for it 5 or 6 times. And this profile is like one of those games, where they're going to have to pick up some 4th downs to keep up and stay in this game. And they're going to be aggressive in trying to do that. So even at -250, I think it's very interesting to play the yes side of that. Feels like it probably should be a little bit higher. You compare it to the 49ers successful 3rd down conversions. Under 5.5, there's -250. I mean, it feels like they don't need to get to 3rd down at all. So I think that's playing into that number being an under there, because how many 3rd downs are they really going to need to convert? You look at the end of the game, they might have a 5 out of 8 3rd down, conversion rate, because they just don't have that many 3rd downs. So it's interesting when you compare those two, which one is more likely to happen. And I would say the Lions one is more likely to happen. They're going to get a 4th down in this game. So even at -250, feels like that number is a little light.
That is so interesting. Proppy, I want to ask you something before we get to the gems, because I think there was someone in the chat who asked about Sam Laporta. I mean, I think Sam Laporta it's a little tricky, right? Because, well, first of all, I think the 49ers, I don't think it's the best matchup for Sam Laporta in terms of like the actual matchup itself. With that said, he is coming back from injury, and his total is around 48.5, which for the record is still pretty high. That's total that he would have if he was fully healthy, which maybe he is, maybe he isn't. Any thoughts on, and this is a little preview because somebody has Sam Laporta as the gem here. Any thoughts on Sam Laporta's receiving yards prop? Oh, 2 for 2 on mute.
Oh, my goodness. Oh, my goodness.
We're the only ones that can do this. Go ahead. You got the floor.
It's interesting with Sam Laporta. The number I would agree is fairly efficient. If I were to attack Sam Laporta, it'd probably be from a volume-based standpoint, over 4.5 receptions, not getting the best price there. I do think he'll be utilized in this matchup. San Francisco has one of the better pass rushes in the NFL They excel in quick pressure as well. So that's going to force the ball out of Goff's hands quickly. So I do think Laporta will be utilized in the short area pass game if San Francisco's pass rush is as effective as it has been throughout the regular season and the playoffs. So I do like Laporta. I'd be more comfortable taking, again, over 4.5 receptions if you can find a good number on him there, which I don't believe is available in most books. But I think the yards is efficient. I do think there's a little bit of value maybe in his anytime touchdown. He's obviously heavily utilized there as well. But I do think this is actually a good spot. Sneaky matchup for Sam Laporta.
Very interesting. Walter Rogers says, you guys are the best. I learned so much from watching you all. I really, really appreciate you saying that. We're not just trying to give out picks. When we give out the analysis behind the picks, that is strictly to really educate the listener as well, so that maybe they can go through those same mental impressions when they're breaking down a football game or a basketball game or a baseball game. By the way, Hunter Van Halen says, DK has a special, will there be an octopus? And he says, can someone enlighten me as to WTF, what an octopus is? So correct me if I'm wrong, guys, but I think an octopus is when the same player scores the 2-point conversion and the touchdown, correct? Mikey, you're nodding your head. Is that right?
Yes.
Right.
You have to score the touchdown and the 2-point conversion immediately following the touchdown. Not in the same game, but immediately after the 2-point conversion following the touchdown. Right. It's a terrible bet. Don't play it.
I was going to say those odds better be. You know what? I was going to say something to add to that, but Mike McClure just capped what I was going to say. So it is a terrible bet. Speaking of bets that are, a little finicky, maybe a little gimmicky, let's get to the gems. Listen, I went chalk here. I mean, Justice Hill wasn't fully chalk, plus 1,700. That's not a bad number. But anytime I see Amon-Ra St. Brown, and Proppy, you remember this from week 1, right? From week 1 against Kansas City, you all see all these gems here, right? It's 5. I thought I had 6. Maybe it's 5. But the point is, I actually did have 6 because in the opening game against Kansas City, I actually submitted Amon-Ra St. Brown. He scored the first touchdown in that game, but it didn't count because at the time, nobody saw the plus 1,000 that it was. And so I just basically abandoned it. But the point is, Proppy, we've come full circle now, because we've only got 3 games left in the NFL season, and maybe my last gem is going to be what my first gem should have been. And I don't think this needs much explanation. Listen, if Detroit scores first, let's be honest about this receiving core. Josh Reynolds is the wide receiver 2 here. He's fine. He scored the first touchdown for the Lions last week, but it's really the Amon-Ra St. Brown show, the Sam Laporta show. I'm going to go with Amon-Ra St. Brown at plus 1,000 or longer pretty much every single time. I don't care what the matchup is. So that is my gem. That's my first touchdown scorer. Proppy, I just mentioned the other guy that might score if the Lions score first. You have the floor.
It would be poetic if Amon-Ra St. Brown closed the season for you, Sia, with a touchdown here. I could definitely see it happening. And if it's not Amon-Ra St. Brown, I do believe there's a good shot it will be Sam Laporta, who's obviously just had a phenomenal rookie season as a tight end, one of the greatest tight end seasons by a rookie in NFL history, I might add. So yeah, love Sam Laporta's chances to score a touchdown. Already scored a touchdown 2 games ago. Wild card round. And he's heavily utilized once Jared Goff is in that red zone area. So love his value here. I actually think this is a sneaky good matchup for him as well. So going to take the chalk, go with Sam Laporta.
All right, Christopher chiming in here. He says Jameson Williams. Certainly an interesting play. Mike McClure, you have a very, very interesting play. Again, you're not afraid. You're going long odds yet again. Who's your guy?
Yeah, we're going to look at Jauan Jennings here. He's a lot like his teammate Deebo Samuel, and that he's very difficult to bring down when he gets out in open space. He's the guy that commands the least amount of attention on the offensive side. So I think that having to contain George Kittle, Deebo, while I love him, he may or may not be out there every single snap. CMC obviously commands the most attention. I just think Jauan Jennings, the price point is pretty fair for someone who's definitely going to be out there on the field.
All right, R.J. White. Speaking of Jauan Jennings, well, if he's on the field, it might mean that your guy is not on the field. Of course, they could both be on the field too, but talk to us about Deebo.
Yeah, 12 touchdowns in the regular season. So, I mean, you talk about chalk. This is as chalk as you can get. Most sites don't have him at plus 1,000, but one of the major ones do. So I put him in there as my pick, hoping that if he does, suffer for a re-injury or can't play all the snaps, that comes later in the game and he gets his first touchdown early. And they draw something up for him early if they get the first score here. So I could see that. And if they get held out of the end zone, there's some field goals early, and then Deebo is a little banged up. sits down, I could see Juwan Jennings coming and getting that score because he saw a lot of work last week with Samuel beat up there. So it'll be interesting to see how quickly the first score comes, because if it's the first drive of the game, I much rather have Samuel. But if it's 2 or 3 drives in, then that Jennings pick looks a lot better.
Yeah, we got a lot of picks in here. We've got Raving Daryl like Goff loves Josh Reynolds in the red zone. Well, that's true. I mean, he's a much more reliable receiver than Jamison Williams. I don't think anybody would dispute that. Cash and Ticket says early edge anytime pay window -6,000. And then CID says Bateman to score the first touchdown. Don't hate that. I think Bateman, Nelson Aguilar, I think they're all on the table. Some of those third-tier receivers for Baltimore. Hey, can we, Jake, before we get out of here, I do want to ask the guys one more thing. I want to ask them about their Super Bowl pick. Real quick, can we put up the AFC and NFC recap screen just so that people maybe can take a screenshot of it real quick? And we're going to take this down in a second. So I think you all know these picks already. Most of your SportsLine members, so you already have these picks. But for those few of you that don't, just take a screenshot of this and let's go to the NFC right now, real quick, and we'll get everybody having a screenshot of that one. That's the later game, so you have time to kind of consider these if you haven't already placed these bets. And then we can just go back to the 4-shot at this point. I just wanted to make sure people were able to see that. Let me ask you guys. Normally I ask, hey, what are you looking forward to with these 2 games? But instead, how about a Super Bowl matchup? Proppy, I'm going to start with you. Who's playing in the Super Bowl in 2 weeks?
I'm going to take Baltimore and Detroit.
Wow. Okay. I hear you. All right. RJ White, what's your Super Bowl pick?
I'm just going chalk. Ravens have been the best team in the AFC most of the year. 49ers have been the best team in the NFC most of the year, head and shoulders above the rest of the team. So even with the Patrick Mahomes playoff magic, I just think those 2 teams get it done and the inevitable happens. And I think what's interesting, you talk about the odds there. I saw a lot of exact, winner things that had 49ers over Ravens having a lower odds than Ravens over 49ers, which is odd to me considering the Ravens beat the hell out of them, several weeks ago. So it's interesting to see that the market kind of is saying that the 49ers are the better team there, when I definitely think the Ravens are the best team. And if the Chiefs win, I would probably take the Chiefs over the 49ers too. So whichever team's coming out of the AFC is probably going to be my Super Bowl pick.
Mike McClure, who's in the Super Bowl?
I'm going inverse Propstarz today. We're going to go Kansas City, San Francisco, a little rematch of a previous Super Bowl. I'm just going to bet on the Kansas City Mahomes magic here. I think it's the best price point on the board as well. It makes sense with where my plays are. Have them a little undervalued on the money line in this game. So got to keep riding it.
I like it. I certainly like it. I'm going to go with RJ here. I mean, obviously, I'm sticking with San Francisco. They were my preseason Super Bowl pick. So I'm sticking on that side. And I just think maybe we've gotten to a point where we actually have a team in the AFC that's better than the Kansas City Chiefs. And it's tough to even consider that given the track record that we see with Patrick Mahomes and Travis Kelce and Andy Reid. But I do think it's the Ravens versus the San Francisco 49ers in 2 weeks in the Super Bowl. But good news, doesn't matter what we think. We get to watch these games at 3:00 and at 6:30, and then we will have the answer to that question. Ladies and gentlemen, thanks for being in the chat. I forgot to remind you to hit the like button, but if you did, I appreciate it. If you didn't, that's okay. Hit the like button the next time. That's all right. But either way, I appreciate everybody being so active in the chat, asking your questions. Hopefully we got to answer most of them. It was only an hour show. We had 3 analysts plus me, and so we can't get to every single question, but we certainly try. You got 5 minutes until kickoff, ladies and gentlemen, so I'll get you out of here. On behalf of RJ White, on behalf of Propstarz, Mike McClure, and Jake the Snake on the 1s and 2s, 3s and 4s, and 9s and 10s, this is the Early Edge. I am the counselor, and we rest our case.